For 20 years, Lady Louise Windsor remained one of the most overlooked members of the royal family, quietly avoiding titles and attention. But now, something has changed. A sudden shift has pushed her into the spotlight, and the events unfolding behind palace walls are raising questions. Why is the most overlooked royal suddenly making headlines? And what's really going on within the monarchy? Join us as we uncover what's really happening behind palace walls, and why it's impossible to ignore. The girl who was never supposed to matter. The obsession with Lady Louise makes more sense if the beginning isn't ignored. It wasn't a great start. Louise Windsor arrived on November 8, 2003, as the first child of Prince Edward and Sophie. She showed up 2 months early because of a placental complication that almost took the life of the mother and the baby. In any other time period, the story ends right there. But she lived. Ever since that moment, the kid has basically just ignored every expectation people tried to put on her. The parents made a specific call early in the game. The kids weren't going to be full-time royal employees. There would be no constant parades or public appearances. The goal was to give Louise and her brother James a life that looked somewhat normal, or at least as normal as it gets when living in a literal palace. This wasn't how the family usually handled things. For ages, the system treated royal children like props for the institution. Edward and Sophie skipped that. As a result, Louise grew up more like a kid from a quiet country estate than a traditional princess. Louise went to a private school in Windsor and got into competitive horse riding. Eventually, she took up carriage driving. It's a sport so obscure that almost nobody cares about it. But she actually turned out to be good. By all accounts, she was just a serious, normal kid. She wasn't out at clubs or trying to be a celebrity or acting like a tabloid princess. She was just a person trying to stay under the radar while being part of a family that the world won't stop staring at. Being quiet isn't the same as being invisible, and the palace was definitely paying attention. Louise is in a weird spot in the family tree. Since she is the granddaughter of Queen Elizabeth, she was actually supposed to be called Her Royal Highness. Her parents declined the title, so she grew up as Lady Louise, rather than Princess Louise. That move seemed small at the time, but it turned out to be a massive deal. It gave her more freedom to choose her own path than almost anyone else in that family. Certain senior royals were paying attention to Lady Louise all along, including one who would play an important role in her life in unexpected ways. Lord Ivar Mountbatten and the connection nobody saw coming. Ivar is a great-great-grandson of Queen Victoria and a distant cousin of the late Queen. He also holds the title of being the first person in the royal family to publicly come out as gay back in 2016. That move made him a bit of an outlier in an institution that usually moves at the speed of a glacier when it comes to social change. Lord Ivar stays at a private estate in Devon called Bridwell Park. It's a massive property he spent years fixing up, and it's the perfect example of that quiet, rich life that happens away from the official cameras. He isn't a working royal. He doesn't stand on balconies or attend boring state dinners. Despite that, he is still tightly connected to the family's inner circle, and his ties there are actually legit, rather than just for show. The link to Lady Louise's family supposedly goes through Edward and Sophie, who have spent years keeping up quiet friendships with the relatives on the edge of the circle. Apparently, Lord Ivar and Edward agree on how the royal life should work. They both seem to think the institution should be smaller, privacy is a priority, and you don't need to be a constant performer to have dignity. Whether those chats actually turned into a real plan is something people love to guess about. Sources close to the family say Lord Ivar has basically been a mentor for Louise lately. He's someone who knows how to have the royal name without letting it ruin his life. He has figured out how to stay relevant enough to matter, but private enough to actually have a soul. Reports from late 2024 claim Ivar was involved behind the scenes in talks about her future. This supposedly included stuff about property, her inheritance, and how she's going to handle being an adult in that family. His reported involvement would only make sense if there was something bigger going on: a gift, a property, and a prince who was said to be ready to use his influence to secretly help his cousin's future. The estate at the center of everything. Wren's Nest is not a name that appears frequently in royal coverage. It does not have the fame of Sandringham or the grandeur of Windsor Castle, but those who know the royal property landscape will describe it as one of the most quietly coveted estates in the extended royal portfolio. A historic property with deep roots, significant land, and the kind of understated elegance that appeals to royals who prefer discretion to spectacle. Wren's Nest is supposedly close to Windsor, and the other country spots the royals' love. Sources say it is a working property, meaning it has a house and some farmland. It isn't part of the public crown estate. Instead, it is tucked away in the kind of private trust that lets the family move properties around without the public asking too many questions. It is basically a high-end hand-me-down that stays off the official books. It is fascinating how agricultural elements is usually just code for a very expensive garden that lets them claim a tax break while they pass mansions around, like trading cards. The name sounds like something out of a storybook. A wren is a tiny bird that makes a lot of noise, and people love to debate if the name is symbolic or just old. For the people obsessed with this story, the idea of Louise getting a place called Wren's Nest is perfect. She was the royal who wasn't supposed to be important, so inheriting a house with a modest name feels like a scripted ending to some observers. In reality, it's probably just what the previous owners called it. Sources who supposedly whispered to royal reporters say this house was picked out for Louise way before anyone started talking about her getting engaged. The idea was that a girl in her position needs her own spot. It was framed as giving her an independent base so she wouldn't have to live with her parents or rely on a future husband. Apparently, the goal was to give her roots, which is just a poetic way of saying she gets a massive piece of land all to herself. It's unclear who supposedly made the decision to give this gift and how Prince William and Lord Ivar worked together on it, which is the most surprising part of the story. The prince who orchestrated it all. Prince William isn't exactly a low-profile guy. He is the heir to the throne, and the media tracks his every move like it's a crime scene investigation. However, people claiming to be in the loop say William has been playing a strategy regarding the future of the extended family. Apparently, Lady Louise has turned into a major part of that plan. It's less about secret meetings and more about figuring out how to keep the family relevant without it falling apart. The bond between William and Louise isn't exactly front-page news. They aren't in the same age group, and they aren't often seen hanging out in public. However, people close to the prince claim he has always been a fan of how Edward and Sophie handled their kids. He likes the privacy and the fact that the kids didn't let the palace lifestyle completely erase their personalities. Now that Louise is an adult, William has allegedly taken an interest in her future. He supposedly sees her as the perfect example of the low-key, capable royal he needs for his vision of a smaller, less bloated monarchy. The supposed teamwork with Lord Ivar happened because he is in a weirdly perfect spot. He is trusted by the family and knows all the annoying details of royal property deals. He has spent enough time dealing with the palace's red tape to know how to get things done without making a scene. On paper, William and Ivar aren't exactly a natural duo, but William is allegedly way more calculating than he looks in public. Bringing Ivar into the talks about Louise's future is being called a genius move by those in the loop. What supposedly happened next was a bunch of private talks involving William, his team, and Ivar. They even brought in the palace officials who handle the secret bank accounts and private land. The goal was to make sure Louise had her own money and a roof over her head before any wedding bells started ringing. They wanted her to have a foundation that was hers alone, so she wouldn't be stuck if her personal life hit a rough patch later on. The choice to call this a wedding gift was allegedly a smart move. It gave the whole thing a nice, happy vibe that no one would question. It fit right in with the usual royal traditions, too. By framing it this way, they could make the house handoff look like a sweet family moment rather than a calculated move to shift assets. There is nothing like using a wedding as a smokescreen to make sure nobody looks too closely at the paperwork or the tax breaks involved in family gestures. People close to the talks believe the timing was planned and that the gift was meant to signal something bigger about Louise's future position. The wedding that changed the calculation. For ages, nobody talked about Lady Louise's dating life. Her parents were actually good at keeping the press away, which is rare for that family. But by 2024, rumors began to fly that she was in a serious relationship. People began whispering about a wedding being close, and the palace allegedly started planning for her to actually grow up and get married. Details on the boyfriend are harder to find than a royal with a real job. Sources say the partner isn't from the usual circle of snobs or aristocrats. He's just someone who gets the pressure she's under and actually gets along with her family. Edward and Sophie are supposedly on board with the whole thing. Apparently, William's rush to get Louise her own house and money shifted into high gear once he realized a wedding was actually going to happen soon. The timing of the Wren's Nest deal seems to line up perfectly with the wedding news. People close to the family claim the decision to hand over the house was mostly about making sure Louise didn't start a marriage totally broke. The idea was to give her some actual leverage and a place of her own before any legal contracts were signed. Basically, the goal was to ensure she had a backup plan in case the whole marriage thing eventually crashed and burned. Nothing says, "I have total faith in this relationship," like gifting a house specifically so the bride has a place to hide when the inevitable divorce lawyers show up. Real romantic. The choice to reportedly include both Prince William and Lord Ivar Mountbatten in this plan has surprised royal watchers. This pairing hints that there might be more going on than just family feelings. And the question of what that something might be would prove to be far more complicated than anyone initially expected. The royal succession whispers. Nobody is saying out loud. This is where the story actually gets weird. The rumors flying around the palace lately aren't just about a pile of bricks in a garden. Apparently, these discussions are really about where Lady Louise fits into the long-term survival of the crown. The choices being made right now will determine exactly what the monarchy looks like once the current generation finally checks out. It's less about a gift and more about a desperate attempt to plan for a future that hasn't happened yet. Prince William wants to take a chainsaw to the family tree. His plan is to shrink the entire operation to a small group of people to avoid appearing like a massive waste of taxpayer money. Harry is already out of the picture, and Andrew has been shoved into a corner. Most of the extended family is just waiting to become irrelevant over the next few years. However, even with all this cutting, William is supposedly hand-picking a few lucky relatives to actually keep around instead of dumping them with the rest. According to people who claim to know what goes on behind those closed doors, Lady Louise made the final cut. She doesn't chase cameras, she keeps her mouth shut, and she isn't trying to become a social media influencer. Those specific traits make her the perfect tool for William's new version of the monarchy. He wants people who can show up to events without starting a scandal or becoming a total embarrassment. She gets to carry the family name because she's the only one who doesn't come with a side of constant drama. The rumors about Lord Ivar make this whole situation even weirder. Since he's a Mountbatten, his involvement adds a level of historical baggage that the usual Windsor family drama just can't match. That family name stretches back way before the current royals took over, and it brings plenty of its own messy history with it. Nobody is totally sure if this specific family connection played a role in the house deal, but people who obsess over royal symbols say there is no way it was just a coincidence. Then there is the obvious question of what Louise actually wants out of this. In the middle of all this talk about real estate, family politics, and long-term branding, nobody has bothered to ask her opinion. Does she even want to be a main character in the future of the monarchy? Is she actually okay with being handed a house like Wren's Nest if it comes with a lifetime of obligations? Nobody knows, because she hasn't said a word. For now, she is just a pawn in a game she might not even want to play. However, the fact that they are being asked suggests that the quiet girl who was never supposed to matter has become, in some ways, one of the most important figures in the story of what the British monarchy will look like next. The legacy of a gift and what it means for the future. Lady Louise Windsor and the rumored Wren's Nest deal show how power works in the British royal family. It's not about crowns or official announcements. It's not about the drama of public events or palace news. It's about land. It's about what gets passed down. It's about private talks among influential people who know that the true architecture of royal influence is built on land and legacy and the careful positioning of the right people in the right places at the right time. If any of this is actually true, and keep in mind the palace hasn't said a word while half these rumors are totally unproven, then the whole situation is pretty wild. It looks like a future king and a rebellious cousin teamed up to lock in a future for a girl who spent her whole life hiding from the spotlight. They used a gift that looks like a nice family gesture on the surface, but in reality, it's a calculated move. It's not about being sweet, it's about a long-term plan. The late queen was the master of these kinds of sneaky, quiet power moves. She knew the really important stuff happened behind the scenes, not in front of the cameras. She realized that keeping the family business alive meant constantly tweaking things in the background to stop the whole house of cards from falling over. If William and Ivar really are pulling strings for Lady Louise, they are just playing the same old game. They are making bets on the future right now that won't even make sense to the rest of us for another decade. For Lady Louise, getting a place like Wren's Nest would actually be a huge deal. Here is a girl who started out with health struggles, grew up without a fancy title, and spent her time doing normal stuff like school and hobbies. If this house deal is real, it means the higher-ups are finally paying attention. They aren't just using her as a background extra for photo ops. By giving her a solid foundation, the family is saying, in the only way they know how, that she actually matters. It's a sign that they see her as someone worth keeping around for the long haul. Is Lady Louise Windsor being set up to be a future key royal? Or is this just a complicated rumor about the royals? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.